Iran rushes to hide Trump's attacks and tries to sell victory to a population isolated by censorship, but the truth never stays hidden for long. This Saturday, May 9, 2026, while Iranian state television talks about control, resistance, and normalcy. Videos and military statements show Iranian ships being stopped in the Gulf of Oman, the United States Navy keeping up the pressure, and the Tehran regime trying to turn losses into propaganda. The lie told inside Iran is simple. The country is winning, the American blockade is failing, and the Revolutionary Guard is in control of the situation. But its economy, suffocated, and its population, without free access to information, is already reaching a breaking point, and the bloody Revolutionary Guard, in control of the Iranian dictatorship, is hanging by a thread. I'm going to tell you all about this, but now you'll want to be subscribed to the channel to stay well informed. Real-time information with the highest journalistic standards of credibility. Milson Alves. Iran has already reached about 70 days of severe blackout of international internet access, with the outage starting on February 28th as one of the biggest digital restrictions ever recorded in an entire nation. In practice, most of the population cannot freely follow what happens outside the official version of the record. Access goes through state television, state radio, controlled statements, internal apps, and monitored national channels. While a few manage to break through the blockade by alternative means, this is how Tehran tries to sustain the lie of victory. It cuts off the window to the world, delivering to the people a propaganda-edited version of the war. And it hides the fact that, on the outside, Trump's attacks, the naval blockade, and American pressure continue to expose the fragility of the Revolutionary Guard before the very population it claims to protect. This affects work, study, family communication, and any attempt to check what's happening outside of state television. The population receives a filtered version of the war, selected images, victory speeches, and silence about the real cost of the escalation. The regime knows that when the average Iranian sees the other side, the propaganda starts to crack. Iranian television even treated the situation as normal. The video that has surfaced strikes right at that narrative. The United States Central Command reported that American forces disabled the Iranian oil tankers Sistar 3 and Sevda on May 8th, before they entered an Iranian port in the Gulf of Oman. Because they were violating the ongoing naval blockade, the goal was not to sink the ships, but to stop them from completing their route. The message was calculated. Trump didn't need to turn the action into a spectacle to show that the Iranian route remains under surveillance and that any attempt to break the blockade gets an immediate response. Marco Rubio made it clear that if a missile or drone is fired at a US Navy ship, the United States will not just take the hit. As if nothing were happening, Iran tries to pose as the winner internally, but outside state television. It has to deal with a power that responded, blocked, disabled vessels, and still demands a formal response from Tehran to a truce proposal. In the most recent attacks on the two oil tankers, the available information does not indicate any confirmed deaths. But in the context of the war, the human cost is already heavy. The Iranian Ministry of Health, cited by the American military press, reported more than 1,200 dead and 20,000 wounded since the beginning of the operation. These numbers show why Iranian propaganda needs to be so aggressive. When a war takes a heavy toll, closed regimes try to replace questions with slogans and pain with official statements. The next step now is Tehran's response to the American proposal. The White House and the State Department are waiting for an Iranian response regarding a temporary truce. A secure navigation structure. The problem for the regime is that accepting American pressure seems like a defeat in the eyes of its own radical base. Refusing could increase the blockade, worsen the economic strain, and leave the population even more suffocated. That's why state propaganda becomes a tool for political survival. It's not just used to inform, it's used to prevent people from noticing the contradiction between the victory narrative and reality. Of ships at a standstill, internet cut off, a currency under pressure, and borders under tension. The history of Iran itself shows how this kind of lie takes a heavy toll in the war between Iran and Iraq in the 1980s. The revolutionary regime maintained a narrative of sacred resistance for years, while the country suffered enormous human losses, economic destruction, and social exhaustion. The Encyclopedia Britannica estimates that the war caused up to about 500,000 deaths in total, with Iran suffering a large share of the losses. In 1988, when he accepted the United Nations resolution for a ceasefire, Khomeini compared the decision to drinking poison. This episode ties into the current moment because it reveals a pattern. The regime pushes the population towards sacrifice. It calls retreat a strategy, calls suffering resistance, and only admits to pressure when it can no longer hide the size of the problem. Other nations also show how war propaganda can keep a population trapped in a false sense of victory. In 1982, during the Falklands War, the Argentine dictatorship tried to convince the public that it was winning while the military situation was deteriorating. A Washington Post report from that period described how the junta controlled television stations and major newspapers, used patriotic messages, and sold the idea of victory. Even in the face of serious signs on the battlefield in the Soviet Union, the war in Afghanistan was also framed for years in official rhetoric, until the final withdrawal of troops in 1989. To expose the burden of a long and exhausting campaign. The comparison is strong because closed regimes usually act this way. They control the screen, control speech, control the streets, and even try to control the perception of defeat. Today's Iran repeats this logic by blocking the internet, pushing people into monitored channels, and turning every retreat into a cry of victory. And that's where the Iranian version starts to fall apart. If Tehran were winning by such a wide margin, it wouldn't need to cut off access, control the narrative, arrest critics, push the population into domestic apps, and claim that everything is normal. While the blockade continues, the video of the disabled oil tankers doesn't just show a military action, it shows the regime's difficulty in hiding that Trump hit a nerve. The Revolutionary Guard tries to maintain control through intimidation, censorship, and propaganda, but reality breaks through the curtain. Ships are blocked, negotiations are still on the table. And the Iranian population pays the price of a regime that prefers to lie to survive, rather than admit it has put its own nation in a dangerous crisis. I'm Milson Alves, an international affairs specialist, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the community. Milson Alves.